Hello, everyone. Welcome to Medicamentum Authentica. I'm Dr. Andrew Kaufman, and I have a very special guest today. We have Eileen McKusick. And Eileen is a pioneering researcher, writer, inventor, practitioner, educator, and speaker in the fields of therapeutic sound, the human biofield, and electric health. She has her master's degree in integrative education and has been studying the effects of sound on the human body and its electromagnetic systems for something like 25 years. She created a type of sound therapy that she calls Biofield tuning and has trained over 2,000 students to administer this type of therapy. She's the founder of the Biofield Tuning Institute, which conducts peer-reviewed research in this area. And she is the author of the best-selling book, which I have right here, Tuning the Human Biofield, which is a great read. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it explores a lot of different areas of science that are related to this endeavor. So I'd like to welcome you, Eileen, to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me, Dr. Kaufman. Happy to be here.
Great. So I know that you have done lots of speaking engagements, so this is kind of old hat for you, but why don't you give us a little background about how you really came upon this, and then we can see where it's led to the current day.
Sure. Well, coming upon this, right, what is this? I would say that this for me in this moment, almost 35 years of research into health in general, and specifically 25 years of research into the effects of sound on our health, has led me to a new place that I call electric health. And that's the title of my next book that's coming out. It's called Electric Body, Electric Health. And it explores this idea of moving away from chemical, mechanical perspective on body and mind and health and well-being to more of an electric sonic, even electric acoustic perspective on health. My work with sound actually led me to discover that the body has an electrical system in its entirety, and that this electrical system is actually really primary in who we are. It's like our inner light. And when you're alive and your light is on and you're animated and you are there, when you're dead, your body is still there, but your light is gone. Your light is out. And so it's this light that I've been, working with sound with, and discovered that when you make your electric body healthy, when you get the noise and resistance out of your electrical signal, then because this is the blueprint of your physical body will take care of itself. If the voltage of the battery, the electric battery that is you, is sufficiently high, then you don't need supplements, you don't need anything, because the electric energy in your body is making everything run properly. And so my journey with sound has led me to this different perspective, which is a discovery that actually makes health and well-being a lot easier.
Well, I found the same thing as I've explored and learned about natural healing. It really simplifies everything, right? There are many, many less supposed causes of illness, many less ways of conceptualizing, health. And the principle that you mentioned, that basically if we provide the right conditions, our body will actually on its own restore itself to a healthy situation, right? And that's really about a lot of what I do. But when I was reading your book, and also when you were just speaking now, it sort of led me think to this big issue about materialism. Because, right, the turn of the 20th century is when the scientific and health community really adopted this very strong paradigm of like materialism or materialist reductionism, where everything is based on the physical substance of the body, right? And other elements like consciousness or electromagnetism or other types of things like auric fields of the body were completely discounted as, sort of paranormal, mystical type of elements and not incorporated in any of the scientific research. But this has really placed, quite a lot of limitations on how things are approached, and there's been that very strong focus on chemistry, right? But we certainly, even the mainstream health system acknowledges the electrical parts of the body in certain ways, right? Because we have an EKG, where we can diagnose heart conditions based on the electricity of the heart. And we have EEGs and EMGs, right, which look at the brain and the muscles. So it's interesting that we acknowledge it in those small contexts, but we never think about how it incorporates into overall health and physiology.
Yeah, that's what I've been calling we're missing the forest for the trees. Because I think most people are like, yeah, okay, heart, EKG, brain, EEG, got that electric, and maybe, oh yeah, my blood, I get that carries a charge. We kind of get the pieces, but we're missing the big picture that it's all one electrical system and that it's primary. And, anything that has an electric current running through it has a magnetic field around it. That's basic physics. The magnetic field of the heart has been detected for decades, many feet away from the body with the squid magnetometer, So there's been this sort of trying to dismiss the electrical nature of the body as something that is like, oh, subtle energy, that's woo, and it's not. What I've really come to see is that it's so simple. It's like, body's electric. It has a magnetic field around it. Like, treat the electricity and the body gets better. It's so simple, but it has so much noise around it. That it's just people aren't seeing what's obvious. And so that's what I really strive to do in my book that's coming out in January, is just kind of normalize it for people. Like, we live in an electric environment. Like, they're discovering that there's electricity in the bacteria in the soil, and that, that even our gut bacteria are electric, and that digestion is electrical fermentation. Like, everywhere we look, even in the mainstream, like, I had the good fortune over the last few years, as I was gathering information for my second book, to find all of these mainstream publications speaking to the electricity being discovered in our environment. And so, it's kind of popping up everywhere, but there's nobody really talking about the whole big picture of it. And so that's what I do, is I just kind of pull all of these different strands together and go, hey, look, it's all electric. We're electric beings in an electromagnetic environment. And when you start to think electrically, it just makes everything clearer and easier.
Yeah, well, I think, and I think you point this out in your book too, that it can be a little bit intimidating getting into this sort of physics of electromagnetism, right? Because there's very sophisticated mathematical ways of describing this. So, and also it's such a big, broad field to try and integrate this kind of information with biology as it's reported in textbooks and stuff. So I was wondering, have there been any major scientists who have influenced you, or any major theories that have really helped you put things together?
Oh yeah, definitely. So the first thing that I came across that really changed my life was back in 2010, I had started working on my master's. I'd started going to college as an adult because I had made these discoveries in my tuning fork healing practice that I ran on the side as a hobby. I had been in the restaurant business and then in the specialty food business, and I got into health and wellness kind of on the side. I started doing a little massage because I knew that was going to be a first step. And then that turned into playing with tuning forks, which I did for a long time. But in 2006, I made a discovery with my tuning forks that kind of changed everything for me. And that was that I had been using them just over the body, and that had been kind of cool. And people were like, I have less pain, I'm sleeping better. This is, enough to kind of keep me curious and going. And there were a lot of things about using the forks around the body that were strange and incomprehensible and curious. And I liked that mystery. I liked being kind of perplexed by the whole thing. But I started accidentally working in the atmosphere around the body. I started discovering that there was things, tonal anomalies, like I found over the body, I found them in the field around the body. And when I started discovering, kind of like sonar, like I activated tuning fork, bounce the sound off the body and listen to the ping back. There's lots of information there. You can hear pain, it sounds sharp. You can hear depression, it sounds low. You can hear fear, it's got like a pulsing quality. And so I started discovering this phenomena in this atmosphere around the body. And when I started working with those, and it's a very simple process. The body is really just a self-tuning instrument. And when the body receives biofeedback of noise in its signal, it auto-tunes. And it will relax and adjust and like do whatever it needs to do so that it hears itself in harmony. Just like if, your guitar is out of tune and mine's in tune and I give you an E and, you start to tune and you're adjusting your little dial and, till all of a sudden like, yeah, your guitar is in tune now too, right? The human body is the same way. It's very elegant that we're so self-tuning and, just a single note held near us will give us the information we need to come into better harmony. And so when I started working on the field and I started making these adjustments on people from 4, 5, 6 feet away, my therapeutic outcomes became really dramatic. Like pain that people had had for 30 years, it was gone, anxiety gone after a few sessions, like very dramatic outcomes. And I was like, whoa, like I felt like I had this sort of moral obligation to bring it out in the world, right? Because everybody's looking for like effective, efficient, non-invasive ways to ease our unnecessary suffering. And so, there was a really big image problem, because if I told people that I was like waving tuning forks around in their energy field to balance their chakras,
right. Yeah, you might as well add some crystals and potions and a magic wand, right?
Exactly. So I realized that there was an image problem. And so I was like, well, if I have some degrees, that will help. So I actually never went to college as a young person. I enrolled as an adult. And luckily there was a college right down the road from me in northern Vermont that had the only alternative medicine program in the country, which was kind of neat. So I was able to enroll in that. And so I got my undergraduate degree and my master's degree in 5 years. And I wrote a master's thesis on exploring the effects of audible sound on the human body and its biofield. And the biofield is the key word there, because initially when I was doing research for my master's thesis, I was looking in PubMed with like human energy field or
right.
not finding anything. And I was like, what am I doing? Like trying to write an academic paper on this topic. But then I found the word biofield and I found that through, I can't think of his name right now, University of Arizona. Gary Schwartz wrote a book called The Energy Healing Experiments. And that was where I discovered the term biofield. And then that led me to research papers and, people who are now my peers and friends in the field. Paul Mills, Dr. Shamini Jan. I don't know if you know either one of them, but they're both great people to interview. Paul's done wonderful work with studying how gratitude makes us healthier, happier people. He's done wonderful published research on that. And Dr. Jan has done a lot of published research on the biofield. And, thanks to people like them or Dr. Beverly Rubik, kind of opened this up. And I was like, wow, this really is a viable scientific topic. And so there's a whole thing going on right now with the biofield in science, because, it is that territory of challenging the chemical and mechanical viewpoint. So coming back around to really answer your question specifically, I was that was at the time when I was like searching aura in PubMed. My son, who just turned 12, came to the dinner table one night and he said, did you know that there's a fourth state of matter called plasma? And I was like, solid, liquid, gas. Like, no, somehow I missed an entire state of matter. Like, how did that happen?
Gotta love it when the young ones clue us into some valuable information like that.
Yeah, and it was funny because I had just given him, he had just turned 12, and I'd given him some books on science for his birthday because he loved science. He was reading it in those books. So then in the same conversation at dinner that night, we were talking about space and is space an empty vacuum? And my husband's like, of course space is an empty vacuum, because that's what we all believe. And I was like, no, you know what? I read somewhere that like space actually has something in it. And he was like, bah. So I went after dinner and I typed space is not an empty vacuum in the internet. And what did I turn up but plasma? And so that sent me on this like 4-month journey down the plasma rabbit hole where I read everything I could find on plasma. I even turned it into an independent study for my master's degree. And I found the Electric Universe community. So I don't know if you're familiar with them, if you come across Walt Thornhill, Don Scott, and those guys. But that was so eye-opening, because basically what electric universe theory says, it's the same as basically the plasma cosmologists that have been around since the beginning of the 1900s, that space is not electrically neutral, it's electrically charged. And that the sun is not a thermonuclear furnace burning itself out in isolation, but it's actually an electric ball of plasma. And the solar wind isn't just a hot gas, it's electrically charged particles. Like when we get a coronal mass ejection, that's electricity, so that when it hits our upper atmosphere, it turns the plasma that's in dark current mode up there into glow mode, and that's northern lights, right? So this is all electrical phenomena.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating stuff. But before we get too deep into plasma, I just want to make a couple of points about what you said earlier, so that the viewers really understand what you're doing with the tuning forks. And, interestingly, I wanted to mention that I'm sure you're aware of this, but tuning forks are actually used in conventional medicine, but only really to diagnose hearing problems. Right. Mm-hmm. So, but it's not that big of a step to use it right for other things, since it's already in the doctor's bag. But
Absolutely.
when you mentioned, please,
because you do use them to test hearing. Those are the unweighted ones. But there's also a method where you can use a stethoscope and a weighted tuning fork to check for a fracture, where you place the weighted tuning fork on one end and the stethoscope on the other side of where the suspected fracture is, and you can actually hear the interruption in the sound current coming through. So, wow. I absolutely agree. Like, let's just use them to test the nervous system too. Like, it's a very small step to use them the way that I use them for doctors.
Right. No, that's fascinating. I never heard of that, but it totally makes sense, because you use them to test bone conduction of sound into your ears. So obviously, because sound travels differently through a solid medium than through the air. So that would make total sense. The point you mentioned about kind of like a sonar, that you get the feedback and then you can synchronize any incoherent frequencies. Reminds me of the video or experiment where you see, like, they put 25 pendulums on a table and start them all at different times. And then what happens is, that they all synchronize over time. Is that a similar process to what you're achieving with the tuning treatment?
Yeah, it's initially there's incoherence, and then because the tuning fork is very coherent, it's already got its thing going on. The body responds to that coherent input, and it brings itself into coherence. It's really simple.
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing that, it hasn't been thought of earlier, right? But I think it's because of that materialist model that we're talking about that, people would just think it's too hokey to attempt. So thank you for being brave enough to come upon it.
Yeah, I mean, the coming upon it wasn't really even brave. It's been the getting it out in the world that's required a lot more bravery, because I've definitely been attacked. It's like the person who likes to point fingers and declare snake oil. This is like their wet dream, to come after the tuning fork waving healer that seems so improbable. But ultimately, when you just get past the initial kind of image thing, and you start to grasp the physics of it, because it's really just physics, it's resonance and entrainment. It's just a really simple principle. Anything that's in motion, that's chaotic, when exposed to a stronger coherent signal, is going to come into coherence. This is just basic physics.
Right. So now we can, I think, progress to this plasma situation, which is very interesting. And one thing that occurred to me is this concept of the ether. Right, which is sort of what is in the space all around us. And this is what, Tesla's technology, free energy technology, was able to harness energy out of the ether. And so I'm wondering, how is plasma and ether concepts related, or are they?
Well, they're definitely related. They're both missing states of matter, for one thing, from our cosmological story. Right? Because you and I were educated into a cosmological story of solid, liquid, and gas. And then when I, through my own research, I'm like, oh my God, there's 2 more states of matter that we're not told about, and they're connected. So plasma is connective in that plasma is basically just electricity. It's and electricity comes in all different. It comes in the ball like the sun. It comes in sparks like lightning. It comes in sort of ambientness just kind of around us in our environment. We live in a plasma environment. Our magnetic field of any living thing is a bioplasma, right? So it's sort of ubiquitous and everywhere. It's just we're not taught about it, so we don't perceive it,
Yeah, when I was studying in university, like the only time they talked about plasma was the fusion reactor that they had on campus, right? And I never even realized that, neon lights is actually plasma.
That's right. Neon light is a plasma. I mean, plasmas are ubiquitous. They're all around us. And when you start learning about it, you're like, how did I not know this word? How did I not get this? That's how I felt in my early talks. I'm like, who's heard of plasma? Not blood plasma. Like, nobody raised their hand.
Right.
And, and even NASA was referring to nebulas and things as like hot gas. It's really only in the last 3 or 4 years that I've started seeing plasma appear in the NASA publications. And now NASA's talking about electricity in space like they've always been talking that way, but it's sort of crept in without any declaration. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've pulled out countless things that I found from mainstream stuff, just talking about it now. Like but again, there's no larger picture that connects all the dots, right? And so that's what plasma did, was discovering plasma turned on a light that made me be able to start connecting dots. And so plasma led to ether. And ether's an interesting topic because it's another one of those things like the biofield, and it's a really divisive topic. You and I and most people think that, that's a quaint idea that was around back in the 1800s and before, and the Michelson-Morley experiment disproved that nonsense idea, as did relativity. And so we don't need ether anymore. We're just going to take that out of the equation altogether, and we're going to place it with nothing, with the empty vacuum of space. And we're going to tell you that electromagnetic waves don't require a medium to travel through. That's the story we're told. When do waves ever travel through nothing?
Yeah, no, it's imagine a wave from the ocean with no ocean.
Yeah, exactly. If it doesn't work in that context, there's no way it works, because everything is fractal. Everything is, so what is ether? I mean, ether is seen as the luminiferous ocean of clear light that all waveforms arise and travel through. It could also be called the Akasha. It's the primary substance of life itself that is moved by energy. And so these waves appear in it, and whether you call it music or whether you call it sound or light or electricity, every phenomenon is movement of energy through the ether on a very fundamental level. And even Einstein himself, who was kind of the nail in the coffin guy for ether, recanted, and he came back and he said, actually, guys, space without an ether, it's really unthinkable. And they were like, yeah, no, we're not going to listen to you anymore. And I think ether and plasma were removed from our cosmology because Tesla was getting free energy in understanding ether physics and plasma. And, if people don't know that potential is there, then we're attached to, internal combustion and all of that. And the thing is, too, is that, through understanding plasma and ether, when you add these two additional states of matter into your paint box of problem solving in life, I was stuck back before I discovered plasma. I was stuck in the same lobster pots that many people get stuck in. I was had chronic low energy. I had chronic pain. I had chronic kind of low level infections in my body. I was broke. I was in debt. I had a short fuse. I was, and this was after decades of studying health and availing myself to so many things. And I still was not solving my problems. But as soon as I got plasma and ether in my tool belt and I started working with those and started understanding life from an electric perspective, suddenly I started to be able to solve all the problems that I couldn't solve before. And now, no pain, no debt, none of those issues, no disease, it's all gone because of the problem solving capability of having those states of matter in your toolbox. It's such a simple, weird thing, but it makes a huge difference.
Wow. So how did it help your understanding or application of the tuning principle, having this conceptualization now of including plasma and ether into your concept?
That's a really great question. Well, it helped in a few different ways. So one way that it helped a lot was I think in the sort of yogic spiritual approach to life, we're kind of told like all is one, right? But then in our secular, educated, linear mind, there's no unifying principle, right?
Right.
Everything
We're
is
just totally separate from each other, compartmentalized.
exactly. So how do you reconcile the spiritual notion of all is one with this sort of secular compartmentalization? And that was part of the issue that I was struggling with. When I discovered plasma, and it dawned on me, okay, if the sun is a plasma and the stars are a plasma and my own electric body is a plasma, and that's the light that is me, then it's really all one light. It's electric. Like the unifying principle is the plasma. That it's the same plasma in the sun, the same plasma in the stars, the same plasma in this bright mango that's full of electrolytes, right? Sunlight that's in me. And so for me, it became like the spiritual experience of unification where my scientific mind, because this was all science, you read Don Scott's book, The Electric Sky, and it's like pure science, but it is the science of this unification that is missing in the dead, lifeless, materialist view that has like decided to stamp out the life force. Like, oh, no such thing as fields around your body, right? No such thing as a soul.
Right.
Our electric body is our soul. It just is. When I sing and I vibrate my electric body, I am singing from my soul, as is any other soul singer out there.
I'll tell you, that's the clearest definition I've ever heard of the soul before. And I really like that you can sort of talk about it from a scientific point of view, without invoking any magical thinking. So.
Yeah. So that to me was a huge relief. I was like, oh my God, I found the light I was looking for, and it's scientific. The biological light in my body, and I was 18 and decided to see how much pot I could actually smoke. I had this experience of inner illumination where I saw my own electric body, right? But I had no scientific context for that. The only context I had was like, am I Jesus Christ? That was like I'm the light. Like, I only had a religious context to put that
right
in,
yeah
and so now I know, as someone who has been feeding their electric body, I'm here in Jamaica, I go to the beach every day, I'm in the ocean, I sun gaze, I'm in bare feet all the time, I eat lots of fresh fruit, right? I am building up my voltage. When I close my eyes, I am illuminated from the inside, right? And I understand that is I don't need to make myself Jesus Christ. I understand that that's just my biological nature.
Right. Well, I think if you look at the true, Christian writings, what you'd see is really that Jesus is embodied in all of the people, right? So if you look at that true concept, not how it may have been changed or manipulated by organized religions, but it's really is pretty consistent with that. It's just a different way of understanding it.
That's right. Exactly. And the sun, the Father and the Son and the light and all that. In fact, I actually have a student of mine who wrote a biblical defense of Biofield tuning where she actually translated all the language that I use into biblical terminology and showed that we're saying the same thing, which is really interesting.
Wow, that is really interesting. That we could just have different languages to essentially describe the same kind of phenomena.
Exactly. And then that's the end of the divide between science and spirituality, if you ask me. We might be just using different words, but we're pointing to the same phenomena.
Yeah, well, why wouldn't you be able to use science, which is essentially principles of reasoning and empiricism? Why wouldn't you be able to use that to understand spiritual and philosophical phenomena?
Mm-hmm. And the spiritual stuff is like the ether and the plasma. That's why it's not taught in our secular cosmology, because it's, the ether to me is a Holy Spirit, or what the Vedic people call the Akasha, or, it's just got different names, but it's all the same idea of this luminous ocean of pure light, the source of everything.
Right. And when we have a phenomenon like that is spoke about in all the different cultures, and perhaps they have their own language or explanation for it, but it's universally observed, right? Exactly. So that lends a lot of validation that something we should really try to understand more.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
So Eileen, I know that you have done some work to sort of create a map of the biofield. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you came to understand that and how it's organized in general principles.
When I first started working in the atmosphere around the body, and I started to discover things. And it was really, for me, it was really like this sort of blind fumble in the dark. In retrospect, it was sort of like teaching myself a kind of braille, because I didn't know what I was doing. I was just kind of wandering off blindfolded into this territory that I had no idea what I was gonna find or anything. And at the time, I lived in the middle of 93 acres on the top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere in Vermont. And I had a little home office. And when people came, I would even unplug the refrigerator in the next room so that I could listen very, very, very deeply to the ping back. Because I discovered early on, I thought initially when I got my very first set of tuning forks, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, that I was going to activate C and it was going to sound like a C wherever I held it around the body. And that's not what happened at all. In some places it sounded like C sharp or C flat or C full of static, or sound just disappeared completely or suddenly became very loud. Like there was this whole conversation that was happening with the subtle emanations of the body, right? Everything in the body is in motion. Everything in the motion makes waves. Waves propagate. And, we've all had the experience of getting a bad vibe off of somebody or a good vibe. And you can tell from across the room, when you're attracted to somebody's energy, you're not smelling their pheromones from, a few hundred feet away. Like you are sensing their vibe that is propagating through our electromagnetic environment and being picked up by your electromagnetic body, which is very sensitive to vibrations. So one of the things that I discovered was that every emotion that we feel, the wave comes off the body and it actually intersects with the overtones and undertones being produced by the tuning fork. So every single emotion, you can actually hear it in different areas around the body. And I started to notice that every time I heard a tone that sounded sad, and just like we can discern sad music, right? You don't need anyone to tell you like, oh, that music's sad. You're just like, oh yeah, that music is sad. You just resonate with it, It's the same way with the tuning forks. When they hit an area in the biomagnetic field that is holding the vibrational information of sadness, they sound sad. And there's many different iterations of sadness. There's loneliness, there's melancholy, there's wailing or keening. There's a lot of different nuances to the emotion that we call sadness, and you can hear them all. Pain sounds, it sounds either sharp if it's sharp pain, or kind of dull and throbbing. You can actually feel the throb when a certain area in the body's throbbing and you're holding a fork over it. You can hear and feel that waveform being produced. So what I discovered was this language, this emotional language. I also discovered that every pathology actually made a sound.
Wow. Well, hold on a second. I want to stick with the emotion for a minute because, in my experience as a psychiatrist, I've definitely had lots of times where as soon as someone walks into the office, I immediately feel some emotional state from that person, right? And so it occurs to me that perhaps what we're talking about really is the mechanism of empathy. And, I think this really applies to this field of sociology called social contagion, right? Where, in a theater that when one person laughs, other people begin laughing spontaneously, or this can occur with crying, it can occur with vomiting, right? There's many different areas. Do you think that may be explained by this phenomenon you're describing?
Yeah, because when you remember that we were designed to sense vibes and to respond to vibes, and we don't. It's not really part of our five senses. When I read in Bruce Lipton's book, The Biology of Belief, that all of our cell membranes have little antennae on them that are continually sending out vibrational information and receiving vibrational information, I was like, well, that's the biological mechanism of intuition. Like, all our cells, our whole body is like constantly sensing and sending out vibes. All of nature, all of creation does that. And we're absolutely informed by the vibes around us. Well, there's just no getting around that fact.
Right. And it fits with the Hermetic principle of vibration.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
That everything vibrates.
Everything vibrates. Yeah. So, and when things are healthy, they vibrate harmoniously. And when things are unhealthy, they vibrate inharmoniously. So just like a good mechanic, can get in my car and say that waka, waka, waka sound that your car is making is your left CV boot, right? I can listen to your biofield and I can listen to your liver and go, that sound that your liver's making, that's fatty liver. So I'm like a really good auto technician listening to people's noises and telling them what bit of machinery in their body is not moving properly. And then it's making a noise. So, I have this very strange ability to diagnose all kinds of things simply by listening to the noise that it's making.
Wow. So do you need to have like a gifted ear to do this? Like, do you need, to have like perfect pitch or anything like that? Or is this something that anyone can develop as a skill?
Anyone can develop it as a skill. And I actually have a hearing deficit. I needed speech therapy for years as a kid. I remember watching my speech therapist's mouth for years to be able to do sounds properly. I tried to learn how to sing when I was 20, and I was told by 5 different voice teachers over the course of 5 years that I was tone deaf and couldn't hear.
You have a lot of persistence, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I do have a lot of persistence. By the time I got to my 6th sound teacher, we made some progress, and my 7th one was like, you can hear and sing fine, but it took a lot of work to be able to do that. And even now I discover, like, if people are wearing masks, I'm in Jamaica, and, trying to understand a Jamaican who's wearing a mask, who's talking to me, like, forget about it. Like, I really do rely on seeing people's mouth to hear what they're saying. So I have a deficit in this area. And people are like, oh, you have some kind of special gift. If I have any gift, it's that I trust myself, and I trust my own knowing of things maybe more readily than other people do. And that's just because of the way I was raised. But in my experience, people who learn this work over time, some people are more gifted and do pick up the knowing part more quickly than others. But in time, everyone learns how to, there's parts of it that are really easy, like depression sounds like Eeyore, it's like, that's pretty easy to hear. Alarm, like if someone has alarm in their system, the tone will be very sharp. That's pretty easy to discern. Fear has a pulsing quality. So just like, when you get really afraid, you start to shake. It's because that waveform of fear is animating your body. But if it's this low-level fear, we can hear that in the tuning forks. So coming back to the biofield anatomy, what happened over the course of about 3 to 4 years in Vermont, in that very quiet space, 3 years, was that this pattern began to emerge. And I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't looking for anything other than just kind of curiously exploring. But I started to observe 2 key things. One was that what I now call the biofield appeared to be like a toroid, like a bubble with a boundary on the outside and a central channel down the middle, right? So it's like a sphere with a spiral.
Right, like a donut.
Like a donut, and a fat donut.
Yeah.
And that the outer boundary appeared to have more electrical charge. It had more resistance. I could kind of find the outer boundary of the field by moving the fork in and then hitting this area of resistance. So just like the Earth has a magnetosphere, an outer boundary, the sun has the heliosphere, right? It's an area of greater electrical charge and heat that Voyager 1 and 2 actually slowed down as they were traveling through. So we have our own kind of like plasma outer boundary of our field.
Right. So do you see this as a discrete boundary, or is it something that fades out with distance?
No, it's a discrete, it's like a boundary.
Wow.
And you can really feel it. So, so you've got this bubble, and any bubble has a boundary. And so our fields are contained. And most people's fields extend around 5 to 6 feet around them. People who are very strong, who are very healthy, who are very much with God, those people can have much bigger fields. People who are weak or sick, their field starts to contract as their battery goes down. So basically, the stronger your voltage, the stronger your experience of your own inner light, the more expanded your field becomes.
Wow. Does that mean you would have more of an impact on others?
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know people like that. As soon as you get around them, you're just like, they just kind of radiate good vibes, right?
Yeah, I've been around people like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and and I also see Biofield as mind, what we call mind, conscious mind, unconscious mind. So part of what I discovered was that our memories were accessible in this magnetic environment around the body. And I started to come to see that the outer boundary, which is about this big, held information from when that person was in gestation. When we came just inside that was the record of birth. And then as I traveled with the tuning fork slowly through the field towards the body, it's kind of like dropping a needle on an album and reading the vibrational record of a person's life. So if I was working on someone who was 60 and I was moving the fork slowly through the field and I got to be about halfway through it, and I hit a lot of turbulence, and you can feel this. Like, it's kind of surprising when people start learning this. They're like, oh my God, the fork is vibrating more and it feels different and it sounds different. Like there's something going on here, right? There's an anomaly. But what that anomaly is it's the vibrational record of that memory, of that experience. So like we have our own personal cloud storage system around us, this whole anatomy and physiology that holds all our memories, all our beliefs, our ancestor stuff, like every frame of mind we inhabit and go to, everything is in this cloud around us. It's hidden in plain view. And the tuning forks gave me this sonar ability to really explore the whole terrain of it. And so I found that certain emotions, like every time you generate the emotion of sadness, it kind of gets stored off the left shoulder. So when people accumulate a lot of sadness in their life that they internalize, that they don't express, that's just piled up on them, they start to develop left shoulder issues. And so that's just an interesting thing. Every time I hit that tone of sadness, it was always in the left shoulder. And then I figured out this timeline thing, right? So if I'm working on somebody who's 30 and I hit this heavy distorted area around halfway through, I'm going to say to them, did something really sad happen when you were around 30? And they're going to be like, yes. How did you know that?
Wow. So you can time it that specifically?
Yeah, I can time it that specifically. And all of my practitioners learn to do the same thing. You just plot it on the map. They go home with the map. They're like, okay, I just hit this turbulent zone. Let me look it up. Okay, this has his relationship with father, and it's around age 15. And the person will be like, oh my God, like that's when da-da-da-da-da. So it's very, very accurate. And so not only, can we read the history, we can find these very troublesome memories, hold the fork in them, and the body's organizing intelligence goes, wow, that sounds really bad. Let me harmonize that. And the energy that was trapped there, the noise that was creating in your nervous system actually settles down. And then we liberate that frozen energy back into circulation.
So it sounds like it's almost a way of just providing information that your body can internalize and then reconcile.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And that's what I say, like, we're just technicians. All we do is locate these areas, hold the fork in it, and the tuning fork in your body are what solves the problem. We witness it and we empathize with it, because if I'm in something very, very sad, a terribly sad memory, I'm witnessing that with someone. And there's something about being seen and being heard and being empathized with that is very comforting. And a lot of times people say it's very validating, because the forks don't lie. They show everything that's there, And right. So very often I come across things and I start to describe it, and a person looks at me and says, I've never told anyone this before. And then just that confession is good for the soul.
Yeah.
To just like have that terrible thing be witnessed with no judgment, and just be able to relax the tension that you've been holding for however many decades against that particular input, to just let it go.
Right. Well, one of the most difficult things because I'm thinking about this based on my mental health experience, and that this is really a powerful way to help people identify past traumas that are still influencing their life. Right. And
Absolutely.
one of the challenges for people in addressing that in terms of like the psychotherapy or talk therapy is that, well, it could be re-traumatizing just to go through all the memories and the details. But this technique is quite elegant in that you can identify that there is a trauma there, but without having to put the person on the spot to like tell you and then go through the trauma again, right? And it's a much more organic way to overcome it.
Yeah, just on that level of vibes. That said, it can be conducted either way. It can be conducted where the person chooses to tell the story because that's what they want to do, or it can be conducted without them having to do any story at all, but to simply become aware of how it's making them feel in their body. Because they can open up your skull and poke your brain and make your arm do that, right? It's kind of the same as Biofield. Like I can find a memory, I can open up your field, find a memory, poke it, and make you cry. And there's nothing you can do to stop it because we're in there and it's vibrating and it's coming over you. I don't need to know what the story was, but your body gets to experience that release of that emotion. Right. And that's the most important thing, because we were taught, most of us were taught to resist our emotions.
Yeah.
And what I really found is that the root of almost everybody's health issues that I've ever treated, I had a busy practice for a long time, that there was an emotional issue at the root of it. That sore left shoulder, yeah, that's an accumulation of sadness. That sore right hip, that's because your mind and your body are always going. That left ankle injury, well, you're trapped in a toxic situation and have been ever since you were born. And, and you just can't take the ball and chain anymore. Like something's got to change. There's a whole anatomy of injuries, pain, pathologies, and the place in their body where it arises and what the underlying biofield imbalance is that's there.
Right. And well, this is something I really take to heart because, a lot of people have sort of questioned my practice because I, have been focused on psychiatry when I was a regular, allopathic physician, but in natural healing, I work with all conditions, right? And what you said is so apropos to that is because the mind and body interaction, right? It's really one system, one unit. And, you can have a psychological trauma that causes physical illness, right? Like your shoulder example. And you can have physical illness that causes psychological trauma, right? Because everything's connected. So it's great that you have this kind of integrated approach. I wanted to ask a little bit because one of the main things that I educate people about is detoxification. And you mentioned in your book that actually sometimes the tuning procedure can have a profound detoxification effect. So I just wanted to find out more about that.
It definitely can. When I first started getting tuned back in 2010, so I started using the fork, started to develop the process back in 96. And in 2010, I had a group of friends and clients that bullied me into teaching a class for them. I was working on my master's in education. I wanted to wait until I was done with that before I taught, but they were like, no, we don't want to wait. You're going to teach us now. And so they started working on me, and it was the first time that I had received the work. And it was very astonishing. It was very... I sounded worse than any of my clients ever had. Like my students were working off my left foot, and the atonal sound off my left foot was astonishing. And they were like, Eileen, how can you appear so functional? It sounds so awful. And I was like, compartmentalization. Like I'm really, really good at compartmentalization. I learned to take all those sad, hurting, disappointed, broken bits of myself from a difficult childhood and like put them all aside. And create a very functional avatar that I live my life through. I think a lot of people do that. Was I still carrying around those vibes? Yes. Were they affecting my health? Yes, absolutely. I had chronic mid-back pain. I had terrible digestion. I had brain fog. I had, just a bunch of laundry list of low-grade issues, chronic yeast infections, candida. When I started getting tuned, the very first month, I started producing mucus. And I actually lost 7 pounds of mucus in a month. It came out of my nose. It came out of my lungs.
Oh, now how did you measure it? You saved it all up and weighed it?
No, on the scale, like what I weighed at the beginning of the month and what I weighed at the end.
Oh my gosh.
The mucus. No, but I did. I'm like, I could see it in my body. I could feel it because when we lock down emotions, we lock down parts of our body, and that creates stagnation in those areas. I mean, basically, what was a mucus? I think it's cell poop. Like when you're
absolutely.
nothing's getting in and nothing's getting out. And so you accumulate it. And when you start to leave that lockdown energetically, you start to integrate these lost bits of yourself, then the body starts to clean out and junk comes out. And, for me personally, over the years, I've gone through periods of rashes, like pretty significant rashes, a lot of mucus, emotional detox, lots of crying, lots of tears, all of that. In biofield tuning, we say better out than in. Because it's when you hold all of this stuff in them, and in most of it's emotional baggage, when you start to release the emotional baggage, it comes out of your cells. Your emotional baggage is literally in your cells, and it starts to come out, and you start to become lighter and lighter and lighter and healthier and more free as you release this backlog of gunk held in place by dissonance and resistance. And you become a tuned instrument, and your life becomes more fluid, more flowing, and more free. One thing about detox that I do want to say is that there's certain emotions that we hold back that I've observed cause more toxins to accumulate. So I've observed that people who hold back anger routinely, that the tension of holding back anger creates almost like a barrier in your cells that makes you accumulate heavy metals. So the personality that is accumulating heavy metals is very often a personality who is holding back anger. And it is that tendency to put that, just think about it, just feel the lock in the body when I say hold back anger. And think about heavy metals trying to get through that tension and get processed. Like, it just doesn't happen. And so, because we're all exposed to heavy metal. I got tons of mercury in my mouth. I've been, the whole thing. I don't accumulate heavy metals, whereas somebody else will. And that's emotional.
No, absolutely. And, in German New Medicine, they actually talk a lot about that. And they also relate it to the emotional well-being and the lack of psychological shock in their model. So that's really fascinating. So it seems like you could even do specific research on this, right? Where you would take samples from the mucus or any other kind of substance that your body puts out and actually characterize what toxins, and maybe they're even associated with different types of emotional experiences, right? Just like you pointed out.
Yeah. I mean, there's no end of cool science that we can do.
Absolutely. So I was curious about, you mentioned that you use tuning forks that are of different musical notes. And so how do you determine which one to use? And then I was also very curious about if you use tuning based on 440 or 432, or if you had any opinions about that debate.
The first set of tuning forks that I got were the C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And they came with a little tiny instruction book, and they said you use C in the root chakra and D in the second chakra and E and so on. So I kind of got started in this chakra system. I don't really like the word because it's one of those woo bell words. But anywhere where there's a chakra, there's a nerve plexus. So again, coming back to the sort of electromagnetic energy of the body being the same thing as the subtle body, there's a nerve plexus there. Are they related? Are they tuned to the Western musical scale? I don't think so. That set was a 440 set, not a 432 set. I used that for a long time. And then I got another set of tuning forks called the solfeggio frequencies that aren't based on the Western musical scale.
Yeah, I've heard of those.
And I started using those, and those were they're very crystalline. They're very bright. They're very pleasing frequencies. And the C scale sounded kind of dull and muddy in comparison. And after about 15 years of the C scale, I stopped using it. I got a sacred geometry set that I invented based on sacred geometric numbers. I got a number of different sets over the years. I played with a bunch. There was one point where I was doing sessions using 30 forks at one time, just throughout the session. I pared that down, the unweighted forks, to just three. And so currently I use 174 hertz, 528 hertz, and 417 hertz. And those are three of the solfeggio forks. Basically what I discovered is that you don't need all those frequencies. My work is just based on the fact that really you can give the body any input and it's going to use that to autocorrect. And, some people are like, well, the healthy frequency of a kidney is 139.2 hertz. And if you give it that, it's going to resonate in that. But the kidney is not resonating wrong because of what's going on in its tissue. It's because of everything that happened in the field of the kidney that is informing the morphic field of the kidney. You can't just put a fork on it. It will only hold it for a little bit, because the information of the state of the health of that kidney is actually accessible and changeable through the field. And we don't need the frequency of the kidney. We just need to let the kidney hear itself and hear that it's off key, and it will tune itself to whatever degree it can. Now, if there's a lot of physical damage, it's not so easy. So this work is, if disease has gone deeply into the body, tuning the field can help, but that's not optimum. Like, optimally, we make use of this kind of technology to keep ourselves healthy, not to pull anybody back from the brain. Right? Just like every day when I pick up my guitar, I have to tune it a little bit. And if I don't, the music that I play doesn't sound good. So, and if you pick up a guitar that hasn't been played in a long time, it's been transported and stuff, it's going to sound terrible. You're not going to want to play it, right? So we want to take the time. We want to come to a way of thinking about keeping our organism in tune all the time, having daily practices to stay in tune so that we don't get really sick. Like, that's the way we need to learn to think.
Right. So this is much more of a health maintenance type of approach, right? Similar to eating clean food and drinking clean water. But this more...
A little further than that. I mean, we can get people out of pain. I can use this method if somebody's very high in the pain scale. I can take them down to a 1 or a 0 in 20 minutes very often if there's no nerve impingement. So it can be used in emergency situations, emergency medicine, to settle people down. It really helps balance people's emotions. I mean, this is what ultimately electric health is really about. How are you managing stress, and what are you doing with your emotions? Because mostly we're taught just to suppress them. That keeps them in. That's what creates the noise and resistance in our field. Mm-hmm. So when we learn better electrical management, we stay healthy, and we treat mild to moderate things. But I don't treat people who have cancer. I don't treat people who are like really ill or trending towards death. Like, that's just kind of gone beyond the scope.
Right. That's more my realm.
Yeah.
Well, have you ever worked, though, in concert with like other practitioners and people with more severe illness?
Yes. And that's the caveat, is that we will do this if we're part of a team. Mm-hmm. When people start to go out of the domain of us alone, yes, I believe in that the multimodal approach is the best with anything. And if I start to go south in any direction, I'm going to pull in many modes to help straighten me back out again. That's how I live my life. I don't tolerate living in pain. I don't tolerate having anything wrong with me. I figure out how to solve the problem immediately so I can keep myself in optimum health all the time. And so the further people go out of balance, the more they need to be addressed on a nutritional level, on a body work level, on a having someone to talk to level, on a micronutrient level, on a microbiome level. Like, right, you come in on all those angles. Biofield tuning is a wonderful component as part of a team, but not as a standalone when it goes that far.
Great. Well, Eileen, I think, we've had a nice conversation here. Actually, I mean, it was completely fascinating, and I learned so much. And I think the viewers out there have a whole new, concept to investigate and see, how they might benefit from this. And I'm certainly looking forward to trying it myself. Before we wrap up, can you tell the viewers where they can find you and what you have coming down the pipe?
Sure. Well, our website is biofieldtuning.com, BIOFIELD tuning.com. You can learn about the method, to understand more of that. We've got classes. Because of COVID, we've actually had to pivot and go from teaching these small, intimate, in-person classes all over the world. We are actually creating an online certification course, and that's going to start to be available in July. I sell a range of tuning forks. We didn't get to talk about the weighted tuning forks that I use, but I also have 5 different weighted tuning forks that I developed and invented, or completely based on my own research. One that supports 3 that support the electromagnetic body that are based in the Schumann resonance. They're overtones of the 7.83 Schumann frequency. So I have one that's 93.96 hertz. That's a sonic slider. That was designed for personal care, so you can learn about that there. It's coherent electrical information that is good for your body and your biofield. I also developed forks for our etheric body. The ether, one of the properties of the ether is geometry, that all of the geometry that underlies what nature forms around is present in the ether. And a lot of that is based on phi, the golden mean. And so I developed a pair of Fibonacci forks that invoke the sense of geometric order in the body. So those are there.
So now, is that geometry you're talking about, like what we might see in the cymatic images?
We do see some of that in cymatic images, but more I'm kind of referring to like the golden mean, the golden ratio, like
Right.
the way spirals unfurl, right? So that 1.618 number of order, beauty, truth, harmony, right? The golden ratio, that is created through these 89 and 144 hertz forks that I created. And when you use them, they give your body the information of that order. So, speaking of ether and plasma, I developed forks specifically to support our etheric bodies and our plasma bodies. And you really feel it when you use them. And so we can, use them on ourselves. We can, if you're a provider of some kind, you can use them on others. I'd love to teach you, Dr. Kaufman.
No, I think that may be in our future.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty easy to learn. It's not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward stuff. We have a home study kit, actually, where you get the forks. It's the first step in becoming a practitioner. You get a kit, and it's got instructional video and my book. And so, you can kind of dive in and start to learn. If you have to become certified, you have to take a class, but that's going to be easier than ever now with online. And then we also have practitioners all over the world. So you can experience one-on-one sessions with people. And we also do group audio sessions. So there's a whole bunch of stuff there and ways to explore and learn more about it.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I wish we had more time because I think we could definitely go on for hours exploring these interesting ideas. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. All right, take care.